Airplanes are interesting. It's one of the few places in the world where you can sit for 90 minutes and talk to a complete stranger who's willing to tell you their deepest, darkest, most intimate secrets. Now, the funny thing is that I am in the secret-keeping business. A few years ago, I was on a flight to Little Rock to talk to a group of soldiers who were about to deploy into combat. And I was sitting next to a gentleman who was interested in the fact that I worked for the Department of Defense. And so he told me a story about his best friend, Jason. Now, Jason was an amazing saxophone player. He could have started his own band. He probably could have played in the symphony orchestra. He could have gone to Juilliard. But in his senior year, people were asking him, "What are you going to do?" And Jason, with pride, held his head high, stuck his chest out, and said, "I've received a distinguished honor. I'm going to play in the Marine Corps band." As graduation came, the war in Iraq broke out. And when Jason went to Iraq, they didn't send him with his saxophone. He was manning a .50 caliber machine gun atop a Humvee. And as they were doing route clearance, the first person that came running out of a ditch with a gun was a little boy. And Jason said, "I don't want to kill no kid." And his fellow Marines said, "Take him out." So he looked back down into the Humvee and he said it again. "I don't want to kill no kid." And they said, "Marine, do what you were trained to do." And I'll end this story by saying that every night when Jason goes to sleep, the face that he sees is the face of that little boy. So, I want a little audience participation today. I need to breathe. The question that I want to ask you is, what do you think the correlation is between deployment or going to combat or war? What's the correlation between deployment and suicide? Your options are going to be, there's a high correlation, there's a medium correlation, or there's a low correlation. I want everybody to participate. How many people think, thinking about that story of Jason, that there's a high correlation between deployment and suicide? And how many of you think that there is a medium correlation between deployment and suicide? And then how many of you think that there is a low correlation between deployment and suicide? Okay. So most of you believe that there is a high correlation between deployment and suicide. So the first thing that I want to teach you is that there is no correlation between deployment and suicide. What that means simply is that there are just as many soldiers who die by suicide who have deployed or gone into war as those soldiers who have never gone into war. And there's a reason for this, and shortly I'll tell you the reason why. Today I want to talk to you about why men should be allowed to cry, why soldiers should be allowed to talk and pain should be allowed to be shared. Today, I want to give you some insights that might help you understand the emotional fortresses that soldiers and veterans learn to build. But you don't have to wait until you join the Army to begin to practice what we believe. It's like that movie from the 70s, When a Stranger Calls. You know, she's in the house alone and she's getting these threatening phone calls. Now, of course, this was before caller ID. That would have been a short movie. Right. But in one of the calls, she's on the phone with the police, and they say, "We've traced the call. The call is coming from inside the house." So the Army simply reinforces something that we were taught a long time ago. That's simply that men don't cry. When a little girl falls down and hurts her knee, we go into the high voice. "Oh, my baby all right? Let me kiss that boo-boo. Oh, can I put a Band-Aid on that owie?" But when a little boy falls, the message is very different. We say things like, "Get up and stop crying, because boys don't cry." Or worse yet, we say things like, "Get up and stop crying before I give you something to cry about." And so the military has endless versions of this. Endless versions. Suck it up. Drink water. Drive on. There are even people, when we lose a loved one, who would tell us to pull it together so that we can be strong for somebody else. A few days ago, I saw a shirt that read, "To err is human, to forgive divine, neither of which is Marine Corps policy." As one drill sergeant put it, "I can't teach two things at the same time. Either I'm teaching you to be hard, or I am teaching you to be soft. And we ain't trying to create no soft army." And so the lesson that we learn is that soldiers don't know when they can begin to talk about their problems. I was at Fort Hunter Liggett in California a few months ago, and a retired command sergeant major stood up, erect, in his civilian clothes now. And he said, "You can talk once you retire, sir. Once you retire." It's not always the obvious things that can take us out. Until recently, the Department of Veterans Affairs was reporting that we were losing 22 veterans a day to suicide. The new number suggests that we're losing 20 veterans a day. That's still 7,400 veterans that we lose each year to suicide. And of those 7,400 veterans that we lost in 2014, 70% was not receiving services from the VA. So the first thing that I taught you is that there is no correlation between deployment and suicide. So soldiers don't suicide because of deployment. Soldiers don't suicide because they're afraid of the enemy. And soldiers in war look forward to coming home. But once home, some soldiers ask to return to war. In a study that I did with other military researchers at Fort Bragg, we found in looking at suicides in the Army Reserve that there were 3 primary stressors that were present in most of the suicides that we investigated. The first stressor was relationship problems. The second stressor was financial problems. And the third stressor was legal problems. So now that we know what lethal stressors look like, how do we defeat them? Well, first, let's look at what we know about soldiers. They're not good at asking for help. They wear camouflage that allows them to hide in plain sight, but so too are they able to hide their feelings and emotions and pain and sorrow in plain sight. Soldiers are not allowed to whine, and the mission always comes first. And soldiers don't always have somebody to share their experience with. My experience with soldiers and veterans is soldiers like to talk to other soldiers about their experiences. Veterans like to talk to other veterans about their experiences. And because we believe that they are strong, we don't always do a good job of checking in on them to see how they're doing. And despite what we've been told, soldiers are not invincible. So while soldiers are not afraid of dying, some soldiers find it difficult to find a reason to keep living. I love the line from the movie A Few Good Men where Jack Nicholson says, "The truth, you can't handle the truth." But I want to take it a step further and suggest the truth, we really don't want to know the truth. I wonder how much fun life would be if I was constantly bombarded with the truth. The truth about the military is that war is not fun. Killing is not fun. Saying that you have a problem can be a punishable offense. And when soldiers and veterans die by suicide, it's rarely because they went to war. Now, here's the secret. The reason that there is no correlation between deployment and suicide is because the change that takes place happens long before they ever leave boot camp or basic training. In my opinion, there are a couple of things that the military takes out of every soldier, out of every Marine, and it's something that they never really put back. The first thing is empathy. The ability to care about how somebody else is feeling. Now, for me, that makes sense. How can you take a man's life if you're thinking about his family? If you're thinking about his young daughter or his elderly mother that he's caring for? To take a life requires a certain degree of emotional numbness. And while that's effective in combat, it's not necessarily effective in your marriage. While the military doesn't take away a soldier's will to live, for some it takes away their excitement for life in the process of instilling emotional numbness in preparation for killing. So I meet soldiers who have difficulty feeling, who have difficulty loving, because they've prepared themselves to avoid hurt and sorrow. The second thing that the military takes out of soldiers is comfort in being able to ask for help when you have a problem. For soldiers, the penalty for saying that you have a problem, like post-traumatic stress disorder, is real. The consequences are real. They could lose their security clearance. Their opportunities to get promoted could be limited. They could have their weapon taken. They could be found unfit for duty, and ultimately they could be medically boarded out of the military. And just because a soldier is no longer in the armed forces doesn't mean that he doesn't still think like a soldier. After years of being told to suck it up, drink water, and drive on, it's hard for veterans to ask for help. The third thing is not so much something that the military takes as much as it is something that it gives, and it's training on how to kill. Secrets wouldn't be taboo if we acknowledged that we all have secrets. Pain wouldn't be taboo if we acknowledged that we all have pain. Problems wouldn't be taboo if we acknowledged that we all have problems. So what do we do when we don't know what to do? Oftentimes we do nothing. So I've taught you that there's no correlation between deployment and suicide, that we teach soldiers to become emotionally numb, that we teach them that it's not safe to ask for help, and we've taught them to kill. They deserve to reconnect. They deserve to love again, to feel again. As civilians, we need to help them redefine the reasons for living. The charge that I'll put to you is to ask, not who did you kill, but how did you heal? Thank you for listening.